Daniel Durst is the worst. Daniel Durst is the worst.
How do you say that?
DUERST. Just remember, Durst is the worst.
Durst the worst, bitch!
Durst the worst, bitch!
Data center. So if they have water, good to know, yeah. Yeah. There is a liquid cooling thing, but it's not water. Yeah, it doesn't. It stops the heat, but it does a lot of that stuff too. So, thanks everybody for coming. I'm Mark Feil, CEO of Securest Data Centers. My background, I'll just give you a little bit of history on what we do, why we do it. My background is I ran the data center and cloud business for a company called XO Communications, which was about $1.5 billion fiber company. And they sold to Verizon a couple of years ago. I left there, got into data center consulting, found I live in Minneapolis and commute. The Milwaukee data center that you're about to see was originally built by AT&T. It's kind of a standard data center. You can see hundreds of these around the country. There's a couple of attributes when we go through the data center that make this very different. And I want to show you a couple of slides on what the future is and how blockchain and what happens with fiber networks and how data centers are distributed. The current thought process and the current networks and the current data centers are really not built to support distributed computing and distributed server architecture like blockchain. So as we go through this, but my background is data center and cloud. And feel free at any point to ask questions. This is a presentation I've given a few times. There's one slide that I don't have in here that I'm going to probably track down. How familiar are you with blockchain Bitcoin? Like 1 to 10. How many are below? If 10 is the most, 1 is the least. Anybody below a 5? Okay. Maybe-ish? Okay. I have no clue how to read. All right. So blockchain is, there's more experts in here, but blockchain is really a way of doing a distributed architecture that eliminates some of the network constraints around security. So there's a great YouTube video. It's a TED Talk. And the basic concept is it uses the inherent mistrust that people have in systems by making the distributed network eliminate the ability for distrust to become reality. So in other words, the architecture of blockchain, by being as distributed as it is, makes it so that there's not a single point where you can attack and hack and steal. So for example, has everybody heard of Target Corporation? Okay. So the Target breach and how that was attacked was a single network connected printer at a HVAC vendor, an HVAC vendor of Target's. And the way the attack went was they went into the printer, got into the HVAC vendor's local network, they got in then to the Target vendor network, from the Target vendor network into the corporate network, from the corporate network into the point of sale network, and they stole credit cards. So that attack happened by one weakness in the network. Blockchain actually flips that on its side, and it distributes the resource in such a way that the attack will have to take over more than half of all the resources that are out there. So if you think of, all I have to do is find the security code from an HP printer that somebody bought at Best Buy, which is probably password is password, right? And now I have to attack 100,000 devices simultaneously and beat them. So the reason I kind of give that description is I'll give you a little background on who Securus is. We're a local Milwaukee-based company. I'm from Minneapolis, did data center consulting, found this asset about 2 years ago, was helping the prior owner dispose of it, and found that Milwaukee has some issues, so we decided to go out and do a fundraise and start a company. So I'm the CEO of Securus LLC, which is a local Milwaukee company. And we really got into this business to attack the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses of the existing data center environment. So most data centers won't take Bitcoin miners, and they don't like blockchain. And the reason is, when you see these servers, first off, when you open up the door, you're going to hear them. And then when you stand in front of them, it's like having a whole bunch of blow dryers, because each one of these, it's actually, each one of them is a 1,400 watt blow dryer. And we put 8 of them in a cabinet, so if you can imagine 8 1,400 watt blow dryers aimed at you, that really wreaks havoc on data centers. Because data centers have to keep the environment cool enough so your computers don't burn. So what we've got is a data center company that wraps a number of things around the actual physical facility. So I'll kind of skip through this part of it and get to the next slide, which I think is going to make more sense. Most people in IT are worried about there's a lot of different worries, but there are 4 things that keep them up at night more than anything else. Security, target breach, that's the easiest one to use. Mobility management. So how do I, especially for people who are always on these things, how do I as a CIO make sure that you have access to all of the applications all the time, no matter where you are, and they're always secure? And if you happen to leave this at Bar Louie and walk away, and you're a hospital, that when the next person picks this up, they don't have 100,000 health records, and now you have a large fine. So this drives people nuts, both CIOs nuts. The concept of business continuity disaster recovery. And the reason I bring this up is because all of these are solved with blockchain in a unique way. Business continuity disaster recovery. Think Hurricane Sandy, right? So 8 feet of salt water and 2 weeks without diesel fuel. Data centers went dark, businesses went out. So there's this keeps a lot of people up at night. What happens if a natural gas explosion hits? What happens if a tornado hits? Whatever it is. And then the last, cloud. I would imagine if I asked everybody in here what is cloud, I would get however many people are in here plus 5 answers, right? Because it means something different to everybody. So here's the reason we're different and why we as a data center are actually kind of enthusiastically taking the AMP miners. So the left-hand picture graphic is, this happens to be the Verizon XO fiber network, but if you called CenturyLink, if you called AT&T, if you called Windstream, this is their network. Because in the late 1990s, there was a guy named Phil Anschutz who owned the Southern Pacific Railroad, and he said, I'm going to build a fiber network. And he had right of way, and he was digging a trench. So all the other fiber providers said, yep, we'll get in that same trench with you. So as you can see, there's basically 2 east-west main fiber paths. One that goes from LA through Phoenix, Dallas, Atlanta, and then up. And then one that goes from San Francisco to Salt Lake, Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, and then it splits. And then you have north-south fiber routes that look a lot like the interstate highway system. So that's the state of the network today. If you look, there are some natural cities that make an awful lot of sense to put a data center. Atlanta, for example, where you have 2 north-south fiber routes and the primary east-west, all come together literally in one building at 56 Marietta in downtown LA, or in downtown Atlanta. In LA, there's a single building where all these fibers come together. It's one Wilshire. And each one of the cities across the country has this single building that has all this connectivity. So now if you're thinking about, I want to attack a network, right? I want to try to assault the blockchain. If all of it existed in one big centralized data center, as you can see, you can attack it from the network. So for example, if you had all of the ANT mining capacity sitting in the brand new Microsoft data center that they're putting in Des Moines, or in the $2.5 billion data center that's getting built in Atlanta, you don't have a single point of attack and you go after the network. So what we're doing, our plan, is we have our first data center in Milwaukee. We're looking at St. Louis right now. And you can probably guess which cities we're going to look at to move to. So Atlanta's high on the list, Dallas is high on the list, St. Louis, Denver, Salt Lake, because we want to be where the network is. And then what the plan all along has been is to put in a distributed architecture to break up that one single big data center and move it out closer to the users. So has everybody heard of IoT, Internet of Things? So basically, I keep using this analogy because I think it makes sense. I don't understand how IoT is going to work. And I've got a lot of time in the network because, and the example I use, let's say it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm sitting in my self-driving Tesla on the 405, which is the busiest highway in the world, and my refrigerator is talking to my toaster, which just told my Tesla to drive to the store to get some bread because the refrigerator said I'm out of milk, or the dry cleaning is all ready, right? So you have all of these little devices talking to each other, times the millions of people sitting on the highway, times the millions of people in other cities. And if all of that, it's called chatty traffic, and basically these networks were built for businesses that send big streams of data, and these are really large bandwidth pipes. They weren't built for what's called chatty traffic. Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Because the amount of, it's called overhead, required for all of those little bursts wreaks havoc on networks. So our plan is to, instead of having one big data center where you bring all of those Teslas together, is to break it up and move the computing out to the edge and farther closer to the users sitting on these high capacity networks. If you go to YouTube and look at how blockchain is built, it's a thing called a Merkle tree, and if anybody wants, I'll send there's 3 YouTubes that I really like. One's pretty techy, one's kind of marginally techy, and one's a TED Talk. And so it will kind of get you all the way through them. But that basic architecture, what we're doing with our network and data center, is exactly the same architecture as blockchain, which is distributed servers, each replicating to each other at the same time. And for Bitcoin mining, the amount of bandwidth required is pretty minimal, right? Because of the way the miners work. They're crunching stuff and then they, go out and hit the network. So it's a very small amount of bandwidth. But as blockchain becomes relevant to logistics, banking, insurance, anything that has a chain of custody requirement, health records, those are going to start pushing bigger chunks of bandwidth out there because there's more activity through the network, not just sitting at the miner, but actually through the network. So this architecture really starts making sense for them. And when you go down and see the other piece to what we're doing, data centers don't like ant miners, really don't like ant miners because they throw off so much heat. And when you go down, like I said, you've got all these blow dryers blowing at you. We have to keep the environmentals down there at about 78 degrees because that's what servers and computers like, right? So if you think about you're watching a CD on your laptop and pretty soon the fan kicks on and it gets so hot you can't keep it on your lap anymore. Well, if you can multiply that times thousands, that's what a data center is. So we have to keep that cool. These things throw off a lot of heat. And when we get down there, I'll walk through. Air is the method that almost every data center uses to cool. Air is actually one of the least efficient ways of cooling. It's actually an insulator. So anybody wearing a down coat, the reason it keeps you warm is there's air in there. It's an insulator. So what we're doing is we're working with 3 different immersion cooling methods where you're actually going to take the server and instead of using air to blow the heat from one part of the data center to the other, to these big air conditioners, and you'll see them on the wall, and then it sends it up to the roof. Out here there's these things that are, you know, it's like the air conditioner that sits outside your house. We've got 5 of them sitting on the roof here. Instead of doing that, which is horribly inefficient, we're going to take these servers and put them into what's called a dielectric fluid. Dielectric just means it's non-conductive. So you can put electrical components into it. It's the same thing that they cool transformers with. The reason we want to do that is 1,400 times more efficient to cool than air. So if you think about the analogy, you're sitting on the beach in Lake Michigan, and it's 105 degrees out, and there's a wind blowing. You're still really hot. You stand up, you walk into the water, you're cold just like that. It's the exact same concept, because the water cools you off 1,400 times more efficiently. So the plan is to have these hyper-dense deployments that are, whether it's Bitcoin mining, GPUs, so a GPU is a graphic processor unit that drives a lot of heat as well. So some of the applications for blockchain are going to use GPUs. We won't care. It doesn't matter what you bring, we will be able to cool it. And we as the data center will allow you to pick any one of the most efficient cooling methods, and we'll handle the heat rejection on the other side of it, if that makes sense. So the reason we're different is I'm not afraid of the heat getting thrown off those things because we're putting in technology that will dissipate it more efficiently than everybody else. I'm going to stop for a second. I know I covered a lot, and anybody, like I said, anybody who wants, I'm going to grab a yellow pad. If you just want to send me give me your email, I'll send my 3 favorite YouTubes on blockchain to you that kind of give an understanding. And there's one point in it, if you remember this, it's called a Merkle tree. Architecture is exactly the same thing as a Merkle tree, which is the basic way that blockchain validates itself through the architecture. If that makes sense. So anybody have questions, comments, thoughts? Anything? Yes?
Hey, I'm James Wilson. I'm Bitcoin Milwaukee, and I just want to say on behalf of the group, we really appreciate you taking the time to have us and explain all this stuff to us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and the time. So our plan is to be mining agnostic. We want to be the home for, you name the mining operation, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. Because eventually data centers are going to run into a challenge, and we're approaching the market exactly counter to what the current data center architecture is. So I appreciate everybody coming. Zip, yes.
How far are you from implementing that cooling technique?
I'll show it to you.
Oh, so you have implemented it already?
We have implemented it, and like I said, we're working with 2 other alternatives that are also implemented. We don't have it in the data center, but I'll show it to you downstairs.
Just to clarify, so is Liquid Cooled Solutions building miners right now?
No. Nope. They're looking at trying to cool them, but they're not building them yet. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
How's your electricity costs here? I mean, Wisconsin's not the cheapest.
You're right.
For that type of thing, but.
So there's 2 components to the cost of electricity. One is the price per kilowatt hour, and the other one is how much you're using. Right? So data centers for these ant miners, I will get through there's this thing called PUE, and it's how efficient a data center is. Ant miners are horribly inefficient. So for every watt that I put into the ant miner, I'm spending almost a watt to cool it. So if you think it's 105 degrees at home, you got to crank up the air conditioner, and at the end of the month your bill goes up, right? It's because it's getting really hot, you got to cool it. So this is probably not going to be our largest deployment of ant miners because we're at about 9 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour. St. Louis is 5.7.
So 9 cents is still cheaper than my 14 cents I can pay at home. So, you know.
Correct.
So.
And if you think about that, so at XO, 111/8 was 23 cents a kilowatt hour for a commercial. So, you know, if you look at the different areas, we're looking to be in deregulated Texas, there's a lot of renewable energy spread out in Denver, in Iowa's actually doing a lot with renewables, Minnesota's doing a lot with renewables, there's a lot of wind turbines. So we're looking for either deregulated or renewables to drive that down. But the bigger issue for me is for every watt that we use to power an amp miner in a liquid cooled environment, we have to buy 0.8 watts to cool it. So the efficiency is more than offsets the higher price for now, but now if I can take that hyper efficient and cut 40% off my electric bill by moving to a different market.
And then liquid cool it too on top of it.
Correct, that's right, so I have a multiplier.
And plus you can up the hash.
That's right. Yeah, so
More efficient cooler.
the Antminer S9 is tough to overclock. GPUs you can clock to 100%, run them full throttle. So here's the other piece to this is if you run a standard GPU CPU, it's got a fan on it. When you run it at 100%, the fan is actually eating up about 20% of the electricity to keep it cool. These immersion techniques remove the fan completely. So not only are you clocking it at 100%, but you've now saved 20% at the server because you're not driving a fan. And the fans cause vibration, air has static, it's got dust, it's got humidity, it's got all sorts of bad things, right? You open up your computer at home, and at least for me, there's 2 kinds of dog hair and a whole bunch of dust in it, right? When you have it in a liquid cool environment, it comes out pristine.
Do you guys plan to stay at Gordon, Milwaukee as you
Yes,
expand?
yes, yeah. So this is going to be, so this space is a combination of, so one of those blocks was business continuity, disaster recovery. This is actually disaster recovery workspace. We're fairly close with a fairly large government entity for this being their backup place to go in case there's a failure at the primary. So this will always be our corporate. And what we're going to do is have centralized engineering here to support the distributed network. Yes?
Does the data center themselves own mining equipment, or is it
No.
like your clients, customers?
We will probably own mining equipment to provide service level agreements. So one of the challenges that we're seeing with, that we're nationally, with Bitcoin, with any kind of mining, is the failure rate of the devices. Part of that is the environments that they're in, right? I saw what they have up in the northwest part, which is a big pole barn with big fans blowing through it. And we actually got an old S7 from there that had bugs and grass in it, literally. And one of the ASIC cards had failed. So when you see what we have downstairs, it's far superior. What we're planning on doing is offering a service level agreement that says if you put your amp miners here, if one of them fails for some period of time, we'll mine into your wallet while we repair it as part of our service. But we aren't going to compete.
Have you heard of the Dragonmint 16G?
No.
It's coming out soon. It's going to be a competitor of the Antminer.
Okay.
March.
Yeah, they're out there.
Okay. So the other nice thing about what we're doing is we're form factor agnostic. So we have a cooling method for whatever the form factor is. So the S7 and the S9 is the perfect little extruded aluminum. We can cool that. We can cool GPUs. If somebody comes out with a different form factor, basically we just retrofit it, yank the fan off, and flood it with oil. They don't like it called oil. It's dielectric fluid, but I call it oil. Fewer syllables. So there was.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Any ideas maybe going to moving to just DC in your data center because everything
Yes.
requires 12 volts and
We are way down the path with 2 different options for DC.
that's
So-
your second waste of energy is your
Huge.
conversion from AC to DC.
Yeah, so we lose about 10% through the circuit just to get to your amp miner. And then your power supply is at about 85 to 92% efficient-ish.
Depends how much money you spend on it.
Yeah, right. Plus it's got a fan, it's got vibration, there's noise. Yeah, so we are actually looking at a couple of different patents. Us having patents, and then also we're working on that. So yes.
So, for example, if I had 100 amplifiers, S9s, and I wanted to pull from here, what might that cost somebody?
I would love to have that conversation with you. So it depends on a lot of things. Do you want us to serve them? Do you want us to, what kind of deployment are you looking for? I'm more than happy to have that discussion. We're fairly competitive. Part of it is how long, what is the cost of being down? And at 19,000, the cost of being down for 2 days is a lot more than it was when it was at 4,000, right? So there's service levels that we have to talk about. Do we want to use DC? Do you need generator backup? Do you want UPS backup? There's a whole bunch of different components to it. I think the other group is here, so
Can we send that yellow pad?
yeah, let me
Daniel Durst is the worst. Daniel Durst is the worst. How do you say that?
DUERST. Remember, Durst is the worst.
Durst the worst, bitch!
Subscribe, bitch!